Consider this a journey into the darkest corners of the human soul, where the line between sanity and madness blurs. Before we embark on this horrific story, a small message from me. If you find stories like these fascinating and want to explore more worlds through my writing, remember to subscribe or follow. Your support is a great motivation for me to continue creating deep and captivating content. Now, let's step into the darkness together. The city of Veridia, a sprawling titan of glass and steel, usually hummed with the predictable rhythm of ambition and commerce. Its skyline, a jagged testament to human ingenuity, pierced a sky often bruised by pollution but occasionally painted with breathtaking sunsets. Beneath this grand facade, however, a darker current had begun to stir, a discordant note in the urban symphony that would soon crescendo into a terrifying roar. It started subtly, almost innocuously, with a single isolated incident that the morning news dismissively labeled a senseless act of violence. But Detective Kaylin O'Connell, a woman whose cynicism was as ingrained as the lines etched around her hazel eyes, knew better. Nothing was ever truly senseless. There was always a motive, a twisted logic, lurking just beneath the surface. Her phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m., a shrill invasion of the fragile peace she'd managed to snatch after a grueling 16-hour shift. The caller ID glowed. Detective Miller, her perpetually optimistic, tech-savvy partner. Kaylin groaned, pushing herself out of the tangle of her sheets. Miller, tell me this isn't another missing cat report gone viral. Her voice was raspy, laced with the fatigue of a woman who had seen too much. Worse, Kaylin. Miller's voice was tight, devoid of its usual playful lilt. Much worse. We've got a Code 7 at the old waterfront district. Captain Davies wants you on site, stat. Says it's something unique. Unique was rarely a good sign in police parlance. It usually meant macabre, grotesque, or utterly baffling. Kaylin pulled on a pair of jeans and a faded hoodie, her mind already sifting through the mental Rolodex of Veridia City's unsavory characters. The drive across the sleeping city was a blur of neon signs and empty streets, the silence amplifying her apprehension. The waterfront, a decaying relic of Veridia's industrial past, was a maze of abandoned warehouses and rickety piers, a haven for the city's forgotten and forlorn. When she arrived, the scene was already a tableau of flashing blue and red lights against the inky blackness of the bay. Uniformed officers cordoned off a vast area, their faces grim in the artificial glow. Captain Davies, a man whose patience was as thin as his receding hairline, met her at the perimeter. His usual bluster was replaced by a somber quiet. O'Connell, thank God. Miller briefed you. Only that it's unique, Kaylin replied, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. The air here was heavy with the metallic tang of the bay and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet. Right? Follow me. Davies led her through the labyrinth of forensic technicians, their camera flashes popping like agitated fireflies. They paused at the entrance of a derelict fish processing plant, its corrugated iron walls rusted and pockmarked. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. A single industrial light hung precariously from the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows. Then Kaylin saw it, or rather him. The victim, a man in his late 20s, was seated upright against a support beam. His eyes, wide and staring, were fixated on some unseen horror. But it wasn't just the fact of his death that stopped Kaylin in her tracks. It was the presentation. His clothes, a simple t-shirt and jeans, had been meticulously cut open, not torn, revealing his torso. And there, stitched onto his skin using thick, black thread that looked like fishing twine, was a symbol. A crude, intricate pattern, almost like a stylized, interlocking set of initials or a forgotten rune. It was unsettlingly precise, a macabre embroidery. Jesus Christ, Kaylin breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She'd seen her share of brutality, but this was different. This wasn't just anger or passion. This was calculated, theatrical. He's been dead for at least 12 hours, Miller said, his face pale, holding a notepad with trembling fingers. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. Toxicology is pending, but looks like a sedative was used. Cause of death appears to be exsanguination, but the wounds, they're not from a knife in the traditional sense. More like surgical incisions, precise, almost ritualistic, and then the stitching. He gestured vaguely at the gruesome artwork. The me, Dr. Chun. She's never seen anything like it. Kalen knelt, examining the stitching more closely. It wasn't just decorative. It was functional, binding together deeper wounds that had bled profusely. The killer had essentially sewn his victim's flesh together after inflicting mortal injury, creating a grotesque tapestry of death. Who is he? Daniel Thorne, 28. Works at a small accounting firm downtown. Clean record. Lives alone. Neighbors heard nothing. Girlfriend reported him missing yesterday afternoon when he didn't show up for their dinner reservation, Miller recited. Thorne was just an ordinary guy, swallowed whole by an extraordinary horror. Over the next few days, the initial shock gave way to a chilling sense of dread. Dr. Chen's preliminary report confirmed the meticulous nature of the killing. The incisions were clean, made with surgical precision, suggesting a killer with anatomical knowledge or at least a steady, practiced hand. The sedative was potent, leaving Thorne utterly incapacitated before the agonizing procedure began. The symbolic stitching, dubbed the Mark of the Stitcher by a sensationalist local paper, remained a mystery. It wasn't in any known cult or gang iconography. The department formed a task force, and Kalen found herself at its head, alongside Miller. The pressure was immense. Veridia City, once proud of its low violent crime rate, was now gripped by an insidious fear. News channels played the story on repeat, anchors adopting grave tones, psychologists speculating wildly. The Shadow Stitcher, the new moniker, had stuck, lending an almost mythical quality to the unseen killer. A week later, the city's tenuous calm shattered again. Another body. This time, a young woman, Sarah Jenkins, 32, a barista from the trendy district of Midtown. Her body was found in a meticulously arranged display in an abandoned art gallery, her eyes open, her expression a mask of terror. And on her torso, the same grotesque stitching, the identical symbol. This time, however, there was a subtle difference. A small, almost imperceptible knot in one of the threads. Kalen stared at it for a long time, a chill seeping into her bones. It wasn't a flaw. It was a signature, a progression. The stitcher was honing his craft. He's getting bolder, Davies stated grimly during their morning briefing. The scent of stale coffee and desperation thick in the air. Midtown isn't some forgotten corner. It's bustling. He chose a public place, even if it was abandoned. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a renowned criminal profiler brought in from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, cleared her throat. She was a woman of sharp intellect and sharp pursuits, her gaze piercing. Bolder, yes, Captain, but also more confident, more secure in his methods. The choice of victims is still confounding. Thorne, an accountant. Jenkins, a barista. No obvious connection. No shared social circles, no common workplace, no known prior contact. He's selecting targets from across the socioeconomic spectrum, creating a tapestry of fear, not targeting a specific group. So he's random? Miller asked, frustration evident in his voice. Just picking people off the street? Not random in the true sense, Reed countered, tapping a pen against her chin. He's not just grabbing the first person he sees. There's planning, reconnaissance. He knows their routines, their vulnerabilities. He's choosing people who, to the casual observer, are unremarkable. People who might not be missed immediately, or whose disappearance might not raise alarms until much later. This allows him time. And the staging, the meticulousness, the artistic flair, if you can call it that, points to a highly organized, highly intelligent individual. Someone with a grandiose sense of self-worth, who views his acts as art, as a statement. A statement about what? Kalen interjected, her mind racing. What's the message? That's the million-dollar question, Detective, Reed replied, her eyes meeting Kalen's. It could be a statement against society, against conformity, against the mundane. Or it could be deeply personal, a symbolic act that only he truly understands, but that he needs the world to witness. The stitching itself is key. It's not just a wound, it's a binding. He's sewing something together, or perhaps tearing something apart and then trying to reassemble it in his own twisted image. The next few weeks were a blur of false leads, frantic phone calls, and the omnipresent weight of failure. Every Veridia city resident felt the cold breath of the stitcher. People stopped going out after dark. Restaurants and bars saw dwindling crowds. Parents kept their children indoors. The city, once vibrant, became a place of whispered fears and anxious glances. Kaylin and her team worked tirelessly, combing through CCTV footage, interviewing countless witnesses, poring over forensic reports. Every piece of evidence felt like a shard of a broken mirror, reflecting only fragments of a horrifying whole. The press, initially focused on the victims, now turned their predatory gaze on the police. Veridia's finest helpless against the shadow stitcher, one headline screamed. The public trust eroded with each passing day. Davies was under immense pressure from the mayor's office. Then came the third victim. This time, the location was particularly audacious. The grand foyer of the Veridia City Public Library, a historical landmark often bustling with tourists and students. The body, that of a retired history professor, Dr. Elias Vance, 70, was found draped over a central reading table, surrounded by open books on anatomy and ancient rituals. His body was not merely stitched, it was adorned. Bits of fabric, carefully selected from various mundane items, a torn page from a map, a snippet of a forgotten letter, a piece of a child's drawing were intricately woven into the macabre pattern on his chest, creating a mosaic of everyday life. The original symbol remained, but it was now a central piece in a larger, more complex design. This was no longer just about killing. It was a narrative, unfolding in blood and thread. "He's evolving," Kaylin stated, her voice devoid of emotion as she stood over the scene. The library, a sanctuary of knowledge, had been defiled. The smell of disinfectant mixed with something metallic and sweet. The first two were just practice. This is a statement. A message. Miller pointed to a small, folded piece of parchment tucked under Vance's hand. "Found this, Kaylin. Forensics hasn't touched it yet." Kaylin carefully picked up the note with gloved hands. It was written in elegant, almost calligraphic script, black ink on aged paper. "The threads of society are frayed, detective. I merely mend them or unravel them to show the true pattern beneath. You seek a monster, but I am merely an artist revealing the hidden truths. The patterns are everywhere if you only know where to look." Vance understood this. He saw the patterns in history, just as I see them in flesh. The note was signed with the same interlocking symbol as the stitching. A shiver ran down Kaylin's spine. This wasn't a random madman. This was someone brilliant, deeply disturbed, and utterly convinced of his own twisted righteousness. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was taunting them. He was challenging her. Dr. Reed, standing beside Kaylin, read the note over her shoulder. "He's escalating the psychological warfare. This isn't just about the act. It's about the interaction. He wants to engage. He wants us to understand, or at least, to acknowledge his artistry." "What's his motive then?" Captain Davies slammed his fist on a nearby table, his face red with rage and frustration. "What's he trying to achieve by tearing this city apart?" "Control, Captain," Kaylin said, her eyes still fixed on the note, a grim determination setting in. "And recognition. He believes he's exposing something, correcting something. He sees himself as a judge, a philosopher, a god. And now he's explicitly brought us into his game. He's daring us to find the patterns. The patterns." Kaylin looked around the defiled library, at the open books, at the symbolic additions to the stitching. A map, a letter, a child's drawing. What did they signify? What was the common thread in the lives of an accountant, a barista, and a history professor, beyond their sudden, brutal deaths? What patterns was the shadow stitcher revealing? The answer, she knew, lay not just in forensics or witness statements, but in understanding the mind of a killer who saw the world not as it was, but as a canvas for his dark masterpiece. The hunt had moved beyond mere investigation. It had become a macabre intellectual duel, with Veridia City as the prize. And Caelan O'Connell, haunted by the vacant stares of the victims and the intricate horror of their final display, felt the threads of the Stitcher's game tightening around her own life, pulling her deeper into the terrifying narrative he was weaving. The genesis of fear had taken root, and now it was beginning to bloom. The city would never be the same. The note from the Shadow Stitcher had sent a seismic shockwave through the Veridia City Police Department. It transformed the investigation from a reactive hunt for a killer into a chilling, proactive chess match. The killer wasn't just a ghost. He was a presence, watching, taunting, communicating. This shift ignited a new kind of terror, a pervasive paranoia that seeped into every corner of the city. Citizens didn't just fear the unknown. They feared the deliberate, intelligent malevolence that now seemed to walk among them, an unseen puppeteer pulling their strings. Caelan O'Connell found herself consumed by the case, her life shrinking to the dimensions of crime scene photos and profiling theories. Sleep became a luxury, often interrupted by fragmented nightmares of needles and thread, of vacant eyes staring from stitched flesh. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a temporary waypoint between endless hours at the precinct. Miller, ever the loyal partner, grew increasingly concerned about her, often bringing her lukewarm coffee and forgotten meals. "You need to step away for an hour, Caelan," he'd often plead, but she'd just wave him off, her eyes glued to the whiteboards plastered with victim photos, timelines, and the ubiquitous symbol of the Stitcher, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the FBI profiler, became an indispensable if unnerving presence. Her analytical mind, detached yet incisive, cut through the emotional fog surrounding the case. She saw patterns where others saw chaos, connections where others saw randomness. After the library murder, Reed spent days meticulously dissecting the note, the new elements of the staging, and the victimology. "His ego is immense," Reed explained during one intense late-night session, pacing the war room, her sharp heels clicking a rhythm against the linoleum. "He believes he's intellectually superior, not just to us, but to society itself." The note isn't just a taunt. It's an invitation to a challenge. He wants to be understood, to be admired, even feared for his vision. The references to mending and unraveling suggest a philosophical underpinning, however twisted. He sees society as broken, and he, the Stitcher, is the one to fix it, or at least expose its flaws through his morbid art. "But what flaws?" Caelan pressed, pointing to the victim board. "What do an accountant, a barista, and a history professor have in common that would make them targets for this kind of correction?" Reed paused, her gaze sweeping over the victims. "Initially, I hypothesized a desire for anonymity in his victims, people who wouldn't be missed immediately. But Vance was a well-known figure, albeit retired. This suggests a shift. Or perhaps the initial victims served a different purpose, a testing of his methods, or merely a prelude to a grander narrative. The added elements, the map, the letter, the child's drawing, they are not random. They are symbolic, deeply personal to him, but he expects us to decipher their meaning. The forensic team, led by the perpetually exasperated Dr. Chun, worked overtime to extract every conceivable clue. Traces of a rare sedative, a specific type of industrial-grade fishing twine, minute skin fibers that didn't belong to the victims. Each piece was a microscopic puzzle, tantalizingly close yet maddeningly unhelpful in identifying the killer. The stitching itself offered the most consistent forensic signature, an unusual knotting technique, almost like a sailor's knot, but modified. It's precise, consistent, Dr. Chan had reported, and requires a significant degree of manual dexterity and practice. Someone who works with their hands, but with an almost artistic sensibility. Weeks bled into months. The task force followed every lead, chased every phantom, yet the Stitcher remained a shadow. The public's initial terror solidified into a simmering resentment against the police. Captain Davies faced daily denunciations from the mayor's office and the media. Caelan felt the weight of it all. the city's fear a palpable shroud. Then, the fourth victim appeared, escalating the horror to an unprecedented level. The body of a city councilwoman, Eleanor Vance, 55, was found in her own home, not just stitched, but displayed on her living room wall, meticulously fastened with the same black twine. Her eyes were open, a single tear track dried on her cheek. And this time, the symbolism was even more explicit. Her face was covered by a delicate, stitched mask of an unknown material, and attached to her chest was a miniature, hand-stitched doll, crudely representing a political figure, its head askew. The note, pinned to the doll, read, "They speak of justice, but weave webs of deceit. I merely illustrate the true nature of their puppetry. You seek the puppeteer, detective, but you fail to see the strings. The patterns are glaring, for those who dare to open their eyes." Eleanor understood the strings, though she dared not cut them. The connection was stark and chilling. Eleanor Vance was the daughter of Dr. Elias Vance, the retired history professor. The stitcher had targeted a family. This wasn't random anymore. This was personal, or at least a deliberate escalation of his narrative. "He's sending a message about corruption," Miller exclaimed, his face etched with disgust. "The councilwoman, the political doll. He's targeting people he sees as symbols of societal failure." Kaylin felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. And what about Dr. Elias Vance? What did a history professor represent to him? Dr. Reed, unusually quiet, stared at the crime scene photos. The link to Eleanor Vance is undeniable. But the elder Vance, he studied history, patterns of human behavior, the rise and fall of civilizations. Perhaps the stitcher sees him as someone who understood the frayed threads but did nothing. Someone who merely documented the decay, rather than acting upon it. Her voice dropped. "And the mask, the doll. He's telling us that Eleanor was a puppet, her true self hidden. He's dehumanizing his victims even further, turning them into props in his performance." The realization hit Kaylin with the force of a physical blow. The stitcher wasn't just killing. He was performing a macabre social commentary, using human lives as his medium. He believed he was shining a light on hypocrisy, on the hidden flaws of society. And by targeting the Vance family, he was emphasizing the concept of legacy, of inherited failings. The media frenzy reached a fever pitch. A city councilwoman murdered in her own home, linked to a previous victim. The Veridia city police were mocked, scorned, and ridiculed. Kaylin found herself constantly fending off aggressive reporters, her face a mask of weary determination. Amidst the chaos, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail from Eleanor Vance's home emerged. Her personal office, unlike the meticulously staged living room, showed signs of a brief struggle, quickly subdued. A small, exquisite antique thimble lay on the floor, knocked from a shelf. It was made of sterling silver, intricately engraved, a family heirloom. It didn't belong to the staging. It was a byproduct of the initial struggle. Kaylin picked it up, turning it over in her gloved fingers. It was an anomaly, a tiny imperfection in the stitcher's otherwise flawless execution. "He missed this," she murmured, a flicker of hope igniting within her. "He's not perfect." Dr. Chun later confirmed a faint, partial fingerprint on the thimble, too smudged to run through AFIS, but enough for analysis. "It's a small, fine print," she noted, suggesting delicate hands, possibly belonging to someone with an almost feminine bone structure, or a young man. "And we found traces of a specific type of fabric conditioner on it, not from Vance's home, but consistent with the fibers found at the previous scenes." The profiling deepened. Dr. Reed now painted a clearer, more terrifying picture. He is likely a man, aged late 20s to early 40s. Highly intelligent, meticulous, and extremely patient. He holds a deep-seated grievance against societal structures, a profound disillusionment that has curdled into a messianic complex. He sees himself as a judge, an executioner, and an artist. The choice of victims now appears to be a progression of his themes. Thorne, the accountant, perhaps representing the soulless gears of capitalism. Jenkins, the barista, the everyday, unexamined life. Elias Vance, the observer of history's decay. Eleanor Vance, the political puppet. Each a symbol in his grand, horrifying narrative. He has access, Miller added, looking at the meticulous setup in Eleanor's home. He got into her secured residence. He knows how to move through the city unseen. And he wants us to see the patterns, Kaylin reiterated, a new fire in her eyes. He said the patterns are everywhere. What if they're not just symbolic but literal? What if there's a geographical pattern? Or a temporal one? They pored over maps of Veridia City, marking the locations of each body. The waterfront, Midtown, the public library, Eleanor Vance's upscale suburban home. They seemed disparate, unconnected, until Miller, staring at the map with tired eyes, pointed out something. Look, Kaylin, if you draw lines between them, it's not a star, not a circle, but it's familiar. Kaylin leaned closer. The lines connecting the 4 murder sites formed a crude, irregular quadrilateral, not immediately recognizable. But then, she overlaid the symbol of the stitcher onto the map. The corners of the symbol almost aligned with the murder sites. It's his mark, Kaylin whispered, a chill running through her. He's not just leaving it on their bodies. He's carving it into the city itself. Each murder site is a point on his twisted canvas, painting his symbol across Veridia. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. They finally had a geographical pattern, a literal interpretation of his patterns are everywhere. But what did it mean? What was the significance of this particular shape, this specific configuration of points within Veridia City? Dr. Reed, seeing the map, confirmed Kaylin's theory. He's making a profound statement. He believes the city itself is corrupted, and he is signing his work on its very landscape. The points he chose are not random. They are integral to the shape of his symbol. This is his grand masterpiece, and the city is his canvas. The next victim will be the final point, the completion of his design. The pressure intensified exponentially. They knew the stitcher would strike again, and soon, he would complete his dark symbol. But where? What was the final point on this horrifying map? They mapped out every possible location that would complete the geometric pattern of the stitcher's mark across Veridia City. A handful of locations emerged. An abandoned hospital on the east side, a forgotten civic center building, a historical clock tower overlooking the industrial district. All were places with some degree of isolation, yet significant public presence, consistent with his previous staging choices. The city held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Kaylin and her team saturated the potential target areas, setting up surveillance, running background checks on anyone with connections to those sites, anyone with a history of grievances, anyone who fit Reed's ever-refining profile. Kaylin felt a growing sense of urgency, an almost psychic connection to the killer. She reread the notes, stared at the victims, looking for a deeper commonality beyond their symbolic representation. What if the victims themselves aren't just symbols? She mused to Miller late one night, but connected in a way we haven't seen, not socially, but institutionally. Miller, rubbing his tired eyes, looked at the board. Thorne worked at an accounting firm. Jenkins, a barista. Elias Vance, a retired professor. Eleanor Vance, a councilwoman. He paused. They all represent different facets of the city's infrastructure. Kaylin. Economic, social, educational, political. Exactly, Kaylin affirmed. He's dismantling the city piece by piece, not just symbolically, but literally, by removing its functional components. He's showing us the frayed threads of the city itself, not just individuals. The next victim would be the culmination of his grand design, the final stroke of his brush on the canvas of Veridia. Kaylin knew with chilling certainty that this final act would be his most audacious, his most profound. The web had tightened, the pattern revealed, and the hunt had reached its terrifying zenith. She felt the stitcher's eyes on her, his silent challenge echoing in the empty halls of her mind. The chase was no longer just about catching a killer. It was about stopping a twisted prophet from completing his dark prophecy. The revelation of the geographical pattern sent a frantic surge through the task force. Knowing the killer was deliberately carving his symbol onto the city's map narrowed their focus, but the sheer size of Veridia and the cunning of the Stitcher still presented an insurmountable challenge. Kaylin, fueled by a potent blend of caffeine and grim determination, drove her team relentlessly. Every potential final point on the Stitcher's macabre map was put under surveillance. Every abandoned building, every forgotten civic structure meticulously scoured. The city held its breath, a collective gasp of anticipation and dread, waiting for the final, terrifying stroke. Dr. Reed, her face pale with exhaustion, continued to refine the killer's profile. He's not just leaving a mark on the city, he's performing a ritual. The locations aren't arbitrary. They hold significance to him. And the victims, as we discussed, are symbolic anchors for his message against societal decay. The final victim will complete his twisted narrative, and the location will be a crescendo of his perceived artistic and philosophical superiority. The thimble, the small, smudged print, the fabric conditioner, these microscopic clues became their last hope. Dr. Chen's team managed to enhance the partial print, yielding enough detail for a rudimentary search, but it was still too fragmented for a direct hit in national databases. However, the unique properties of the fabric conditioner offered a slim lead. It was an obscure, high-end, organic brand, primarily sold in specialty dry cleaning establishments and exclusive textile shops. Miller and a team of detectives began the tedious task of canvassing every establishment in Veridia City that sold or used the conditioner. It was a needle in a haystack, but it was a needle. Days blurred into nights. The city's mood was a suffocating blanket of fear. Schools ran early dismissals, public events were canceled, and the streets emptied after dark. The Shadow Stitcher had effectively paralyzed Veridia. Kaylin felt the weight of it all, a crushing burden that stole her sleep and gnawed at her sanity. She saw the Stitcher in every shadow, heard his taunting whispers in the silence. Then, a break. Miller's team hit a small, bespoke tailor shop in the historic district, the Velvet Seam, run by a reclusive, exceptionally talented artisan named Alistair Thorne. Thorne was a man in his late 30s, known for his meticulous work and eccentric perfectionism. The shop owner, a nervous woman named Mrs. Albright, confirmed Thorne was a regular client who insisted on using his own specific brand of fabric conditioner, the exact one identified by Dr. Chun for his personal garments. "He's a quiet man," Mrs. Albright recounted, wringing her hands nervously. "Brilliant with a needle, though, a true artist, but a bit odd. Always talks about true patterns and mending what's broken." The name Thorne immediately snagged Kaylin's attention. Daniel Thorne, the first victim. Coincidence? Or another twisted thread in the killer's web? Kaylin immediately dispatched a covert surveillance team to Alistair Thorne's shop and his small, unassuming apartment above it. Within hours, the surveillance team reported back. Alistair Thorne was indeed particular. He worked late into the night, his shop dimly lit, often seen hunched over intricate patterns. He lived a solitary life, rarely interacting with neighbors. Crucially, the team observed him meticulously tending a small, potted plant, a rare species of night-blooming jasmine, known for its intoxicating, slightly sickly sweet scent. The same scent that had lingered at 2 of the crime scenes, initially dismissed as a natural urban aroma. Alistair Thorne fit the profile perfectly. Meticulous, artistic, reclusive, with a profound understanding of textiles and the human form, a tailor would be intimately familiar with the body's contours. The name, the fabric conditioner, the scent, the true patterns, it was too much to ignore. Kaylin felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and exhilarating. They had him, but they couldn't just arrest him on circumstantial evidence. They needed proof, and they needed to move carefully. The Stitcher was intelligent, dangerous, and likely armed. While the surveillance continued, Kaylin's team delved deeper into Alistair Thorne's past. They unearthed a troubled history. A brilliant, but deeply introverted, former medical student, dismissed from a prestigious university program for unethical experiments, and disturbing fixations on human anatomy and the concept of repatterning biological structures. His dismissal had coincided with a particularly difficult personal period, the death of his younger brother, Daniel Thorne, from a botched surgical procedure, allegedly due to the negligence of an esteemed but aging surgeon, Dr. Elias Vance. And that same university medical program had significant funding ties to the city council, specifically a committee once chaired by Eleanor Vance. The barista, Sarah Jenkins, had been a part-time student at the same university, working to pay off mounting student loans, a system Thorne despised as a soulless machine. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifyingly clear picture. The patterns weren't just abstract. They were the intertwined, corrupt threads of his own shattered life, mirrored in the institutions he sought to condemn. Daniel Thorne, his own brother, was the first victim, not a random one. A twisted act of purification, or perhaps a perverse resurrection in the only way he knew how, by stitching him into his masterpiece. The killer had been living with his own brother's murder all along, using it as the genesis of his crusade. He wasn't just a killer. He was a grieving, vengeful brother, a disgraced intellectual, and a meticulous artist of death. He's using his brother's identity, his life, as the foundation for his entire campaign against the city. Dr. Reed stated, her voice hushed. This isn't just societal critique. It's a deeply personal vendetta, writ large in blood. The final point on the Stitcher's map, the completion of his symbol, was the Veridia City Anatomical Museum, a grand, Gothic structure located on the edge of the old university campus. It was a place where bodies were preserved, dissected, and displayed, a perfect canvas for Alastair Thorne's final, most audacious act. Kalen knew they had to move. Thorne wouldn't wait. That night, as the city slept, Kalen led a tactical team to the Anatomical Museum. The air was thick with a tense, almost palpable silence. The building stood like a silent sentinel, its arched windows dark, its stone facade ominous. Inside, the museum was a labyrinth of dimly lit halls, echoing with the ghost of scientific pursuit. The smell of formaldehyde mingled with something else, the faint, sickly sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. They moved like ghosts, their boots muffled on the marble floors. Kalen's heart pounded against her ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. She saw him then, in the central hall, bathed in the sickly green glow of emergency lights. Alastair Thorne, clad in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, stood over a gurney. On it lay his final victim, a security guard, already bearing the grotesque, intricate stitching, the new pieces of fabric woven into the design. The symbol was complete, but this time, etched not just on the body, but into the very floor around the gurney, using a dark, viscous liquid blood. Thorne was meticulously adding the final stitches to the security guard's uniform, his hands steady, his expression serene. He looked up as Kalen and her team burst in, their weapons raised. He showed no surprise, only a faint, knowing smile. "Detective O'Connell," he said, his voice calm, articulate, completely devoid of panic. "You found the pattern. I knew you would. You have a keen eye for the underlying truths, much like my brother. A pity he couldn't see them." "It's over, Thorne," Kalen stated, her voice unwavering despite the tremor in her hands. "Drop the needle." Thorne chuckled softly, a dry, unsettling sound. "Over? No, detective. It has just begun. The message has been delivered. The patterns revealed. I have merely offered a lens, a mirror to a fractured world. They can no longer deny the corruption, the decay, the fragile threads that hold this city together." He gestured to the victim on the gurney. "This man, he represents the blind obedience, the unwitting complicity in the system's failings. My final stitch, completing the grand design." "Your brother, Daniel?" Kalen pressed, trying to break through his delusion. "Why him, Thorne? Why start with your own blood?" A flicker of raw pain, quickly masked, crossed Thorne's face. Daniel was lost. He was becoming a part of the machine, blinded by its promises. I had to repattern him, to show him the truth. to use his loss as the genesis of the ultimate truth. His eyes, disturbingly bright, fixed on Kalen. And now you understand. You have seen the threads. As Kalen tried to talk him down, Thorn, with a sudden, fluid motion, pulled a small, gleaming surgical scalpel from his inner jacket pocket. He held it not threateningly towards Kalen, but towards his own throat. The final act, detective. For the true artist, the work is never truly complete until the artist is one with the art. Miller, quick as lightning, moved to flank him, but Thorn was faster, his movements precise and practiced. He brought the scalpel to his skin, a thin line of blood immediately appearing. "Don't!" Kalen shouted, but it was too late. Thorn paused, a look of profound peace settling on his features. "The city will remember me, detective. They will see the patterns. And perhaps, they will begin to mend their own frayed threads." With a whispered last word, "Legacy." He plunged the scalpel deep, decisively, into his own neck. He collapsed, his blood staining the polished floor, merging with the symbolic pool he had created around his last victim. Alistair Thorn, the Shadow Stitcher, was dead. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Kalen's ragged breath and the distant wail of sirens. The chase was over. The terror, however, was not. The aftermath. In the weeks and months that followed, Veridia City slowly began to heal, but the scars remained. The capture and death of Alistair Thorn, the Shadow Stitcher, dominated national news cycles. The revelation of his motivations, his personal vendetta against the institutions he believed responsible for his brother's death and his own disgrace, twisted into a grand, horrifying artistic statement, offered a chilling insight into the depths of human delusion. Kalen O'Connell, hailed as a hero, found little solace in the accolades. The ghost of Thorn's taunting words, his claims of revealing truth, lingered. She had peered into an abyss and seen a man utterly convinced of his own righteous cruelty. The patterns he spoke of, the frayed threads of society, now seemed more visible to her, tainting the very fabric of the city she had sworn to protect. The cost of the chase had been immense, not just for the victims and their families, but for the soul of Veridia and for Kalen herself. She took a long, much-needed leave of absence, walking the streets of a city that was slowly regaining its pulse, yet forever marked by the Shadow Stitcher's grotesque art. The fear had subsided, but a new kind of awareness had taken root, a collective understanding that beneath the polished veneer of urban life, unseen forces, dark philosophies, and deeply personal grievances could fester and erupt into unimaginable horror. The Shadow Stitcher was gone, but his legacy, a haunting reminder of the darkness within, was woven irrevocably into the very fabric of Veridia City. And Kalen O'Connell, the detective who had unraveled his final, horrifying pattern, would forever carry the weight of those threads. She had faced the monster, and in doing so, had glimpsed the profound and unsettling truth he had so desperately sought to reveal, that the patterns of human darkness were indeed everywhere, if only one dared to look. And once seen, they could never be unseen.